welcome back to the MovieBabble podcast. This week you have myself, Nick, and Brennan. We've got a pretty good slate this week, so I think we should just go for the big one first. So first off, before we dive in, how are you guys doing?
I'm doing amazing. Thanks for asking, Collin. Couldn't be better.
Pretty good. I'm doing pretty good. I didn't watch Mortal Kombat, so from what I hear from Nick, that was good on me, but that's kind of how I'm doing.
It was good on you. I'm sure you spent your time in a lot better ways than watching Mortal Kombat.
But yeah, let's start with the big one. So Rotten Tomatoes this week kind of upset the world. But was it really an upset? Because I think everybody kind of knew the truth all along, that Paddington 2 is the best movie ever made, according to the good old folks at Rotten Tomatoes. But basically what happened was Citizen Kane had been the movie with the most reviews to stay at 100%. So basically 100% of reviews that Rotten Tomatoes collected were positive until somebody uncovered an 80-year-old review that was negative, and so it dropped the 100% from Citizen Kane. So now Paddington 2 is the movie with the most reviews to be at 100% positive, fresh rated on Rotten Tomatoes. So obviously the internet kind of went nuts and was like, you know what, Paddington 2, the best movie ever. There were some pretty good memes, a couple of them made by yours truly. But yeah, it kind of blew up the internet. I don't think the internet's been in this state since that Kim Kardashian champagne picture from like 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, people on film Twitter certainly love their Paddington 2, and you guys have seen Paddington 2, right? It's delightful. It's really
I'm actually
really wonderful.
I've never seen a Paddington. It's a big blind spot.
Oh, you're missing out. The Paddingtons are great. They're the talk on film Twitter does get ridiculous, but they're both wonderful, especially Paddington 2, because there's just so much wonderful stuff in there. I don't even want to ruin it for you, but it's just like a wonderful warm blanket of a movie, and it earns all of its emotion. And yeah, Paddington's a sweet little bear.
Both movies are really good, but I'm one of those edgy people that likes the first one more. I watch both of them like back to back, and I like the first one more personally. But
same take.
They're both really good, and they're working on a screenplay for the third one, so you might get the best trilogy of all time coming soon.
I hope so. We deserve a Paddington 3. This world deserves good things for once.
But yeah, I think it in the process engaged, I don't want to say new discussion, because I feel like this discussion comes around once a year, where the internet also learns how Rotten Tomatoes works. So the big upset is people like, well, Paddington 2 is not perfect. Why does it have 100%? And the Snyder Cut only has like 42 or whatever. But so I think, just to refresh, so Rotten Tomatoes, they basically just average reviews for other people. So basically they take all the reviews and they say this is either fresh or this is rotten. So if it's 5 and above, it's fresh. 5 or below 5, it's rotten. And then
they actually go 6. They go 6 and above.
Sorry, my bad. 6 and above. But basically, they divide it into fresh and rotten, and then it's a percentage of critics that went fresh, percentage that went rotten. But it almost always gets mistaken as, oh, well, this is like 97% is the numerical score you would give this movie, which is not correct. And so the internet kind of forgets that quite a bit. And I feel like this week is just another example of that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about here. Like it's kind of funny, but people are like crowning Paddington 2 as the best movie of all time now after this, just kind of in kind of a fun way. But realistically looking at it, obviously, I mean, they both had 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. They're not the only things with 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, right? There are tons of things that have 100%. And Paddington 2 has like double the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes that Citizen Kane had. So it was already, by Rotten Tomatoes terms, better or higher up on the scale. So I mean, I don't know what's new here, other than it's now one of another how many ever dozen 100%ers there are out there, just with the most reviews. I don't know, but it's interesting. I'm not going to take away from the fun of the internet this week, because I think it was a lot of fun. The memes were great, and we kind of needed that. I think it was really fun. But even Rotten Tomatoes, they show the scores, right? Like you got to dive into it, but they show the actual score out of 10 as well. So you got your percent of the aggregated positive reviews 6 and above, right? So Paddington 2 is 100%, but it's got an 8.7 out of 10, which is pretty much the score, the score of all the reviews. When Citizen Kane is like a 9.7 out of 10. So I mean, Citizen Kane stands can pull that number out there and and show that to the Paddington 2 fans. But it's fun. It's all fun and games.
Yeah, it's first of all, like the number on Rotten Tomatoes is meaningless. It's just an easy way to just look at and compile all these scores together and make some sense of it. But I feel like one of the things that I've been frustrated with Rotten Tomatoes a little bit is that I feel like they've moved that score out of 10 kind of off the main screen, right? That used to be right next to the percent number, but then you have to click on the other stuff. So they've made it even more indecipherable just by looking at it. But yeah, people just want to look at that 90% or whatever the number is and be like, okay, this is what everyone thinks of this film. It's one of the best movies ever made. And obviously it doesn't matter, but it's a really good marketing tool in terms of Rotten Tomatoes, because as soon as a movie like the embargo lifts, people go to Rotten Tomatoes and see what the reviews are and they look at that percentage. But yeah, I would encourage people to actually read the reviews. Because I do think Rotten Tomatoes is Rotten Tomatoes is really good at compiling so many reviews, and they've gotten better in recent years in terms of just not having it be all white dudes, because I feel like Brie Larson was at the head of that a few years ago, and they've done a better job since, but they still need to get better at it. But yeah, there's a lot of good criticism you can find on it, and just boiling it down to that number is it's problematic from the start, but it's just like, it's also just, it's silly. It's superficial,
Yeah. You also have the fan score, the audience score, they call it on there, right? Which is, everyone loves to compare those, the tomato meter from the critics and then the audience score. And, the audience score was also something that even as recent as maybe 2 years ago, we saw fans just kind of review bomb things like before they saw it. So Rotten Tomatoes has also tried to implement ways that they can prevent that by, I think, I don't do audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm not one of those people. So, but I think that you have to show a ticket now. I think there's something like that where you have to prove that you've seen the movie or something like that. So they have implemented things, because I remember, what was it, Captain Marvel? It was about to come out, and like no one had even seen it besides the first wave of critics, and it had like a 30% or something like that from audience. So like this sort of thing, it's something that I'm happy they've combated it. But yeah, the audience score is always fun to look at as well.
Yeah.
And then everyone uses it as like Batman v Superman, like 30% green splat, and then it's like barely, it's like a 60 some for the audiences, and they're so like, see, film criticism stupid. And then it's the hilarious part, because they use that as the barometer for, see, critics are meaningless, instead of actually like going in and reading the reviews, which is, it's an unbelievable self-own, if you ask me, even though people use that as like film criticism is stupid. But yeah, just amazing that these people who spend their entire lives watching movies mean absolutely nothing because the green splat doesn't align with the audience. It's just unbelievable. Who would have thought?
Well, and even as recently as when the Snyder Cut came out, there was a movement that was actually like pretty big that was review bombing all of the Warner Brothers movies to try and belittle Warner Brothers into restoring the Snyderverse. So like, it's been weaponized as recently as, not even a full 2 months ago when that happened. And this is probably going to be a pretty hot take, but I think the Rotten Tomatoes score, even though it's not an accurate representation of like, what would you give this movie on a score of 100? I think it's normally pretty ballpark what I would end up giving the movie if I were going to score it that way. So if I say something that's like 80% positive on Rotten Tomatoes, normally after I watch it, I'm like, yeah, that was a solid like C+ or a B, somewhere within that range. So I feel like even though that's not its intention, it's normally pretty spot on.
Yeah, I feel maybe I'm a bit more cynical, but I always find that I line up pretty well with I mean, you try not to, but sometimes like you just afterwards you look at because I remember I watch a movie, I kind of determine how I feel about it, and I put my rating on Letterboxd. I'm like, let's go see how other people felt, and I find my things always decently line up with the Metascore. Not full, like not all the time, obviously, but I find that to be pretty good as well. It's always kind of random. But yeah, also one thing to note about Rotten Tomatoes and about what Nick said there, just reading the reviews. For me, as someone who just loves movies, we're in this space together, right? I love reading those little things, like not the whole review, but I love seeing the little like couple line quips that they put from each critic. I think it's a lot of fun. Some of them are hilarious. Some of them are pretty nasty. For me, it's always like a good time after I see a movie, determining what I feel about it, checking Rotten Tomatoes and reading those for some good enjoyment, because it's always pretty fun.
Yeah, some of them are nonsensical. It's like, all right, you need to do a better job, Rotten Tomatoes. I still remember for the Snyder Cut where someone, I guess there's a big DC undercurrent to all of this, which I assume we'll get to in a moment. But there was one critic who said it has the like it like works on levels of a foreign film and works of like Malick. And it's like, what is happening here? Because first of all, you're assuming that just because something is foreign makes it something totally different, which is hilarious. And then comparing anything Zack Snyder touches to Malick is also just one of the funniest things I've ever heard in my life. So maybe they still have a lot of work to do there, but I don't know. Like, I don't even look at it as like a measure of anything. I think it's a fun gauge for people who are trying to figure out what to spend their money on in theaters or on streaming or whatever else it may be. But as for me, I'm very interested in when something has like a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. Those are the most like fascinating movies to me, because I feel like typically the really high scores align with something it's a mainstream general, like, so if you have something that falls outside of that, it's probably a little odd or probably tough to pin down by just regular audiences. But I like to check those out. One of my favorite is The Beach Bum, which one of my favorite movies of 2018. I think it's sitting at like mid 50s on Rotten Tomatoes, but it's just a pure perfect movie. And that score, I think, represents all the great things about that. So I just hope people just look at these things with more nuance, but I guess that's tough to say considering all the ridiculous petitions that are out there. So, so I don't know.
Yeah. Rotten Tomatoes, quite a thing.
I still remember, what was the thing I guess there was the Suicide Squad petition, right? Which was the big one because it was right after Batman v Superman tanked. And then that was in March. And then Suicide Squad came out in August and then also got bad reviews. So there was like some change.org petition it had a bunch of typos in it where it was like, there's a disconnect between fans and critics or something. And then critics don't mean anything, but each sentence made no sense. And it was hilarious. Like, there's something weird there with DC and the fight against critics and review bombing stuff. And there's a lot of misogyny in it too. It's weird. I don't know if we've quite gotten to the bottom of like how to fix it. But I hope Rotten Tomatoes continues to work on that, because people do use it, I think, as their main form of criticism, whether they use it well or not. So I think you like working on what leads to these ultimate percentage scores, I think does matter a lot, even if I don't think it matters personally. I think it matters for a lot of people out there. So I don't know. It was really funny. I really love Paddington 2. And I guess Citizen Kane is the worst movie now because it's not 100%. But this was all just really weird. And yeah, I think you're right. This always comes up like every couple of years or so, where it's just we relitigate Rotten Tomatoes. And it's nauseating, hilarious. I feel like this time it was pretty there's some good like spirits behind it. It wasn't too nasty.
Anything with Paddington is much more lighthearted. It's not like
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah. As soon as I heard the news, I went home and snapped my Citizen Kane Blu-ray in half. I'm just gonna look this in my house anymore.
I'm really looking forward to when in a couple years, when you start, all these college students take their film criticism 101 class or their intro to film studies, and instead of Citizen Kane, we start with the history of cinema at Paddington 2. It's been perfect.
But yeah, it's been interesting. Like, it's been fun. I think a lot of good discussions been opened out of it. But we do have this conversation every couple of years. So at some point, some other movie will take the top spot, or some other movie will have a huge disconnect between critics and fans when the Snyder Cut 2 comes out. So we'll be back here at some point.
If that day ever happens, I'm quitting this podcast.
But Warner Brothers did have another movie to actually quite literally did out-hype the Snyder Cut and outperformed it by quite a bit as far as streaming on HBO Max goes. And that is Mortal Kombat, which is the second live action franchise, if you're counting like theatrical releases. There's like a handful of animated stuff and sequels in there. But this is basically the second take that we've had on the live action Mortal Kombat, this time with significantly better effects. But I don't know if I can call this a good movie in any sense of the word. Like, it was fun watching people kill each other, but there's just so much boring that I don't stand Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, I think this movie is just bad, personally. I really did not like this movie. It's harmless as a thing. You know, there's a few good kills in there. I feel like for Mortal Kombat fans, the bar that they set for themselves, if it's just seeing people die in gross fashion, then you'll get some of that, right? People get dismembered in horribly bloody ways, and I guess that's fine for what it is. But this movie just kind of struck me as the ultimate, we're going to give this director who's never directed anything before this property, so we as the studio can control it and note it to death and make it like this very clear corporate product that we can try to sell to everybody. That's just how it feels like to me, because this movie's like right under 2 hours. All the establishing stuff in the first hour is cut to bits where there's no really establishing shots or anything like that. And there's really weird editing choices, which clearly are meant to just shrink all these scenes up, you know, so you just get to all the fighting later. So it's almost nonsensical if you're really looking at it from that point of view. It's really frustrating. But yeah, other than that, this is kind of just a whatever movie. I feel like this is the best. I mean, it did well at box office, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a second, but I feel like this benefits greatly from being on HBO Max, because I feel like people were like, oh yeah, it's Mortal Kombat. I'm aware of that being a thing that exists on planet Earth, and I'll take a shot and try it. But yeah, not for me.
Yeah, so I mean, just jumping into that box office, as you mentioned, so I haven't seen it, so I'll just kind of not talk about my thoughts on the movie. But yeah, I mean, 23 million last weekend, which topped the box office. It kept Warner Bros. Streak going, right? They keep winning the box office. Kong, then this. But this weekend, I do want to give a quick shout out to Demon Slayer, the Japanese anime movie, which beat Mortal Kombat at the box office this weekend, barely by about 200 grand, but they beat them this weekend. They were right behind them last weekend, and they only played in half the theaters. Big note on this movie, it's now the highest grossing R-rated animated movie ever. It's like the highest grossing movie in Japan, like ever. It's just kind of roaring. I think it came out in October in Japan, and now it's already up to $35 million in North America at Demon Slayer. So that's a little bit of a kind of off topic there, but do want to give a shout out to that movie. But yeah, I mean, Mortal Kombat, it's turned $67 million on a budget of 55, plus the HBO Max. You said it's doing good, Collin. I think you said it outpaced Snyder Cut by quite a bit. I mean, it's I don't know if it's going to get a sequel, but I think it's successful enough that the conversation is going to be there.
That's the other thing too, where literally the last 10 minutes of this movie is just setting up everything for this franchise to come. And it's literally every choice that we've seen go wrong by studios to say, hey, let's make a franchise, they try to do in this movie, where you have your bland protagonist who's just there to set up the world around him. And then we have other like promises of interesting characters to come in future movies, and we're going to just set those up, and then then the movie's over. There wasn't a lot to grab onto here. I guess, like Collin mentioned, the effects are pretty good, I think, for what they are. But it's just like, I don't really know what you're supposed to do with this movie. It just exists.
This movie is horribly, abysmally paced. I was so confused by the fact that the movie ended how it did, because it feels very much like they're getting into kind of a setup for like they're getting into almost like hey, we're going to beat all these underlings and then go fight the big bad guy kind of setup. And so you think that's what they're going, and they all split up and they're taking on their individual people, and you're like, all right, the smackdown with Shang Tsung is going to come. And then they're like, nope, we're saving that for another movie. And the movie just kind of ends. And Scorpion has like a little one-liner to his grandchild or great, I don't know, his distant relation, and it's
something
over.
Somebody.
And it's like,
yeah, it's just 2 hours of setup. It's total nonsense. And until it's literally, I mean, the originals fit this way too, where it's just an excuse for fights to happen, but it's just so boring. Where I feel bad for the main actor, Louis Tan, who I've seen, he's been in a few things before, but he's just given nothing to do here. He's just supposed to be muscular dude who fights, you know? I don't even understand his powers, which is just like he gets hit more and then he's able to have like powers himself. I know it's very bizarre.
It's
But,
like Godzilla type, you know?
Yeah.
Absorb
like
that radiation.
Yeah, there's like an hour long, it feels like an hour long of like training montages just for people to like figure out what their powers are. And yeah, it's just all over the place. It really does feel like it was noted to death for so many ways, where they're like, we have to get this in here. We have to mention all of this lore and this crazy like CGI conversation that happens for like 3 seconds, but we just need to get all these buzzwords in to please the fans. Yeah, it's just, I don't know, stuff like this, IP like this, where I don't really have a strong connection to any of the games. I don't know what to do with it when I watch something like this.
Yeah.
I just kind of sit there, let it wash over me.
What really irritated me was like the convenience of magic in the movie, because they set up a lot of these characters to be able to have their original powers. So like Jax, gets his arms ripped off, gets robot arms. Kano has a laser eye. And they like set up all the technology to give Kano an actual mechanical laser eye, and they're like, no, it's magic. And then even Jax, they give him like robot arms, but they suck, and then magic, and they're good. Like everybody has the same source of magic. Like Kung Lao, the guy with the razor hat, is like, no, it's magic, and that's why I can do this with my hat. So they try to simplify a lot of these things, and it just becomes really dumb. But I think like the most disappointing part for me, and I think this was a pretty universal take, was with Scorpion, because he is he's the most iconic Mortal Kombat character. The creator behind Mortal Kombat, Ed Boon, is like, yeah, this is the character I care about. You can't make a Mortal Kombat movie without Scorpion. And the opening, probably like 10 minutes almost, is just that entire Scorpion scene. And you're like, okay, maybe, Scorpion's going to like come back, team up with his, baby or his ancestor, whatever. And then they kind of just pocket Scorpion until the last 10 minutes. And then he shows up, has a couple cool lines, does all his iconic get over here kind of stuff, and then is like winks and disappears. And that's the end of the movie. And so they just they tease you with Scorpion and almost promise you more. And then you have an hour and 45 minutes without him. And then he shows up at the end because you kind of have to have him.
Yeah, so I guess you have way more knowledge of things Mortal Kombat than me, Collin, but it seems like, so the lead character by Louis Tan, it's supposed to be his power is family, right? He's Vin Diesel of Mortal Kombat. Yeah, exactly. Where he can summon his ancestral line to help fight him, right? And that's what we're supposed to work with the last scene. But it's kind of bizarre because he's such a thinly written character. So when Scorpion does come back at the end there, he literally, he just overtakes Louis Tan's arc as a character, where this whole time he's this drunken boxer who just gets the shit beat out of him in the ring. And I guess that's where his power comes through, where he just gets beaten on. Then he says, oh, I have more power because of my weird metal suit that grew out of me because magic. And then he can fight. So you're waiting for him to, at the end, to fight. What's the dude's name?
Sub-Zero.
Is that his name? Yeah. You're waiting okay, he's finally gonna be powerful enough, and this is going to be his arc as a character. And then Scorpion just comes in and does the job for him, and he's literally just a bystander, just watching this cool fight and doing nothing the entire time. So it's on a character level, it makes no sense. And then it also is unbelievably cheap, as you mentioned before, just kind of an action and plot device. So I'm sure, listen, there's many more fans of Mortal Kombat out there. I'm sure it works well for what they do in the video games, but rendered here, it was just kind of nonsense.
Yeah. And I feel like it's unfortunate because they set up a pretty solid, I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but it's a pretty solid revenge arc for Scorpion in the beginning. It's like you could cut Cole out and then just throw Scorpion in his place, and you'd have that nice, like, oh, I need to kill Sub-Zero because he literally froze my family to death. And instead you have like, oh, well, Sub-Zero's out trying to kill all the champions because evil. Instead of having like this real personal connection between Scorpion and Sub-Zero, which is already there, like for anybody that's familiar with the series, but the movie is like the one emotional thing I think it establishes really well. So it baffles me that they weren't like, let's take our most popular character and focus the movie around him. And instead they're like, what we really need is a character no one's ever played as before with really vague powers that can summon a stick.
Yeah, he's literally, he's the thing that they do wrong in all of these movies, where it's, okay, we need an audience cipher that can just walk around and be like, oh, what does this do? What is this? Can you explain this to me, so that the audience can understand? And then people can give that character just a bunch of mumbo jumbo to explain what's going on. And then he's just not a character for himself. Like I guess he cares about his daughter and wife, or whoever they were, maybe sister. I don't really remember who those characters were because they don't really spend much time with them. And I really do think they try to do something. They try to do a little bit with that Scorpion connection to him through the ancestral line. But it seems like they're just like quick cuts of, oh, he envisions Scorpion in hell, or wherever the hell he goes, right? It feels like there was probably more there on the cutting room floor, but it goes back to what I was saying earlier, where the studio was like, we need to get this under 2 hours. Can you get rid of all this extra junk? But meanwhile, that extra junk probably mattered to make the plot make sense, but this movie just seems like it was just noted to death, and they used this director so they could do that. Like, it's bizarre, where this is literally this guy's first, his name is Sam McQuaid, and he was doing a lot of commercial work before, but this is his first feature. It just seems like they brought him on. I mean, I don't want to, who knows exactly what happened, but it really does seem like they brought him on just to like move him around and be able to kind of not bully him, but be able to get in all their notes and whatnot to build out this franchise. But it sucks. It's one of those where they tried to build the franchise before building the first movie kind of thing. I don't know. Kano was fun at the very least. Fun Australian dude. That's really about it. That's all that made an impact.
Yeah, it's not a movie I've thought about a lot since it ended. I'll just put that out there. This has not been a big head scratcher. But there is a much better movie that came out recently, which is The Mitchells versus the Machines, which is the latest Lord Miller Sony animation flick, which was scooped up by Netflix. It was originally set for a theatrical release, but coronavirus kind of got in the way of that. And then Netflix ended up picking it up. I'm wondering if this was, almost like a precursor to the deal that, just came out a couple of weeks ago. Maybe those two companies testing the waters, but it's a pretty big haul for Netflix. I mean, this is the creative team behind the Lego movie, behind Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, behind Spider-Man and the Spider-Verse. So it's a pretty surefire success, in terms of, are people going to want to see this? And it's a pretty good movie. I didn't love it as much as I think someone else in the chat did, but
it's me. I really like this movie. It's me. I fucking love this movie. This is so great to me. Yeah, Lord and Miller, strike again. They're probably two of the most important people working in animation right now. And I know this movie's directed by Michael Rianda, and I don't want to give too much credit to Lord and Miller because it seems like this was his brainchild along the way. But just Sony Pictures Animation is just smart for just latching on to Lord and Miller. They're so damn creative, and they just really they do an amazing job of looking out for interesting stories to tell, even when they're not directing these movies. This is just a wild movie. I'm so happy it exists, and it's so weird. It is so bizarre that this is made, but I'm sure we'll get into particulars later, including a big giant Furby that talks in hellish tongues, right? But this movie is it's lovely. I don't really know how else to say about it except freaking out about all the little weird Easter eggs in it. But it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's just really charming. And I mean, that's kind of Lord and Miller's thing, is to just put out these really pleasant, like really fun movies. I think this film, from an animation standpoint, feels a lot like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, but they do enough to differentiate it so that even if a lot of the character shapes and like that kind of design is still there, they really separate it with a lot of focus on 2D animation mixed in, and even some live action stuff that I think help keeps it really new feeling visually, which I like. It's always nice to see animation, be used to present things in a weird new way. And then yeah, it's a really charming story. I just found it a lot more straightforward than I think some of their other movies have been. In particular, Spider-Verse and the Lego movies. I felt like it was a pretty predictable story between the family. I mean, you kind of knew where it was going the whole time. But yeah, there's not really anything to dislike here.
Yeah, so I guess we should actually talk about the plot a little bit as well, where so basically we have this lead, but she's going off to film school. She's a big film nerd, so I'm sure this is gonna be a big love for film Twitter. And there's she loves making movies on her phone and uploading them to YouTube, and they're super insane and wildly creative. But she's going off to film school, and she has kind of a strained relationship with her father, where they were really close when she was young and they had so many cute in jokes together, but they've just kind of grown apart, where she's grown up and he's trying to hold on to the past. But and then there's an AI apocalypse that runs into the middle of this, right, where it's big tech. I think what is it, PAL is the name of the tech company, and it's the lead guy is voiced by Eric Andre, and he's an amazing riff off of a Silicon Valley bro. He's just tremendous in this. But yeah, there's this AI apocalypse that happens, so now this family who is on this road trip to send the daughter character to film school, they have to just try to save the world now. And I took a lot away from the father-daughter relationship here, where it's connected. Also, it's not the most nuanced thing in the world, because it's all there, right? It's this connection between how we all interact with each other, and also how we've never been more connected with our phones, but also how we've never been further apart, right? But I think it's just it's so well rendered here in terms of the particulars of it, because literally all the characters in this family are really nice, and they want the best for everyone else in the family. This is not like some thing where the father's evil or the daughter is awful or the mom is not in the picture at all. They're just operating on different wavelengths, and this entire movie is really more about learning to understand where everyone else is coming from, and really listen, and the power of listening, and the power of not even just trying to do better, because everyone is literally trying their hardest, but it's a lot about understanding what makes people them, and learning to appreciate what they like, even if you have no basis of understanding for it, right? And I think it's really sweet and thoughtful, even if the plot itself is very much, we need to destroy the evil thing before they take over the world. That part isn't fun, but there's just so many great particulars in it, and so many wonderful sight gags throughout all of this, where if you look at the beginning, there's all the movies that the lead character is making. She has a movie called Dial B for Burger, which is hilarious. There's a riff on Portrait of a Lady on Fire in there. There's so many others that I'm sure if you freeze framed on like all of her DVDs and stuff, I'm sure there'd be so many amazing title gags there. But it really gets to the core of how I feel like all of us just need to understand where everyone else is coming from. And I think it's an inherently sweet movie about people just trying to make sense of their family and how there really isn't a normal, because these people are bizarre. They try to paint this family as this bizarre, insane group, but they're just trying to be themselves. And that's really all that matters. So I loved it. I thought there was so much great stuff in here, and it's just hilarious. I thought I was laughing throughout this thing.
Yeah, this movie is really, really funny, which I really liked. Big Lord and Miller guy. So I'm happy to see it. I enjoyed it. How do you feel about the title? Because this movie was originally called Connected, and now it is obviously called The Mitchells versus the Machines. I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. I just don't like the title change.
Yeah, I think Connected makes way more sense.
Yeah.
Especially for the themes of the movie. But I think Mitchells versus the Machines is an easier marketing thing, because you see that and you automatically think of like a family fighting robots. And that's what the movie is on the surface, right?
Yeah.
So, but that in sense, I would have liked Connected. I think that makes way more sense. But I don't know. There's a giant Furby in this movie. What else do you need? It's the greatest thing ever.
Giant Furby. I'm pretty sure there was a Joker poster hanging up in one of the kids' dorms when she goes to film school. So it's just kind of the perfect movie.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes that has been made in like blockbuster film the past few years is Disney not having the faith in Lord and Miller to finish out their solo movie. I think that's one of the dumbest things that can happen, because you've seen where in all of their other projects where they are just absurdly creative and they find so many interesting ways to do really thoughtful themes. Like all these movies are batshit insane. Like this movie itself is like, it's edited with like a TikTok, YouTube sense to it. There's like a bunch of like, it mixes with like the drawings and things like that, as you mentioned before. And it literally takes like YouTube videos and splices them with characters in there. And it's really imaginative and bizarre. And they just have a really good eye for really weird and thoughtful things that you can make in a movie, and especially with animation. So I'm waiting for their next live action movie at some point. I would love to see that. What was the last one they made? Probably 22 Jump Street, right? Yeah. And I feel like they've been working in animation since, and I just wish they'd be able to go off and do weird things again. I just think they're supremely talented and weird, and I love that. And we need more of that in big movies. So good job on Sony to like hitch their wagon to them, even though they still make stuff like Peter Rabbit 2 forthcoming.
They're also making a series for Apple TV Plus. It's a murder mystery. Each episode is like the perspective of a different character. So they're doing some live action work with that crazy Apple budget.
Yeah, that's good. It's just between this and Spider-Verse, it's just, I think Sony Animation has so much, they're so indebted to these guys in terms of into the projects they find and who they can attach to make these movies. Or those are two of the most, I think this and Spider-Verse are two of the most innovative animated movies to come out the past few years. I just think they're so bizarre and there's nothing like them. I mean, we can quibble a little bit about whether or not these are amazing movies or not, but I've never seen a movie like this. I just think there's something really awesome that they're able to make these projects work and get the massive budgets for them.
Yeah, and they're kind of part of the original team behind the Sony Animation films, because I mean they did Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs in 2009, right after George Miller won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature for Surf's Up. And then so they've kind of helped pioneer Sony and helped it kind of figure out what it is. And right now it's either Hotel Transylvania movies or it's Lord and Miller. So not a bad mix.
I like the Hotel Transylvania movies. I think they're fun.
Not bad.
Yeah. They're but just like they still have junk. Like it's really pandering, like the Peter Rabbit movie, which is just get that out of my face. But these guys are really smart. I think they're going to continue to make really interesting things, whether they're actually directing, writing, or if they're just producing. I think they're just really good forces for Hollywood. So, and they keep things weird. That's all I ask for on this podcast. Just make things weird.
Yeah. So that is the Mitchells versus the Machines. And then rounding out the podcast, we got a return to the MovieBabble Club. So this week we did Bullitt, which is a 1968 Steve McQueen movie. So this was one that I picked. It's been on my shelf for a couple months, and I was like, you know what? I need to get around to this. I've always heard everything about this car chase, which is, I'm sure we'll dive into it a little bit more in a minute. That's kind of what this movie's known for. And then also Steve McQueen, but he plays a cop aptly named Bullitt with 2 L's and 2 T's, just so you know he's cool. And basically this movie, he is protecting a witness who's going to flip, who's already been targeted for assassination. And so this is basically his escapade as he tries to see out that duty, while being kind of the rogue off the usual beaten trail kind of cop that was really famous in that time period. So first off, let's just talk about Steve McQueen, because I've seen a handful of his movies and he looks the exact same in all of them. So we were talking about this before we got on, but The Blob came out in 1958, which was 10 years before this movie. And if you put a still from those movies side by side, I could not tell you which one was the 28-year-old Steve McQueen. Like, they're the exact same picture.
Yeah, he is. He's got that sandy hair that kind of looks like it's graying, but also not. It's very confusing to me. But when he first comes on screen and you see he has like his wife, she looks 50 years younger than him. I don't know. He looks like he's perpetually 60, even though he died when he was 50, right? But it's bizarre. He's definitely one of a kind in that sense. He's a great actor. I don't mean to disparage him or anything like that. It's just really interesting. He's just such an interesting force on screen. You really haven't seen anything like him since.
Yeah, no, he's my dad's favorite actor. This is one that this week I said, Dad, want to watch Bullitt. He's like, oh yeah, great movie. So that was good bit of bonding there. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I think we spoke about this as well before we got on, me and Nick here, was that we thought it'd be a little bit more macho than it was. It's definitely I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say this is a subdued movie, but it certainly has those noir tendencies, right? It's a little bit quiet here and there, but that it all kind of leads up to it's not our ending of the film, but it all leads to what, in my opinion, is a great chase scene. That's kind of your price of admission.
Yeah, it's that car chase scene is really good. It's really good. Let's just dive into it, because that's the reason that this movie is in the National Registry, because of that car scene. It's like one of the most famous car scenes ever made. But it's really terrific. There's no score used throughout all of that. And I was reading a lot about this movie after I watched it, but they used brand new cameras for the scene, because up to that point, cameras were just way too heavy to even do stuff like this. And they have a lot of it on the front of on the hoods of cars and stuff like that. So you get a really good view of the action. But yeah, they were really just making up techniques as they were going along as they filmed this. And it's so exciting. Great sound design too, where the engines are just revving like crazy. I don't feel like cars make those sounds anymore, and they just sound really cool, but there's just no score. It just tires screeching, really high speed chase. I couldn't tell if any of the footage was sped up or not throughout this, but it's just cool. It's really, really exciting.
Yeah, and I like how still the frames are. There's not a lot of quick cutting or anything to really kind of edit excitement into what's going on. It's literally just a lot of tracking shots as they're following these cars, and then they really don't care if the cars get beat up. By the time the chasing is done, one is blown up, but even Bullitt's car is taking quite a bit of damage just from what actually happens when you drive down hills at 60 miles an hour and try to make sharp turns without slowing down and that kind of stuff. So it feels really authentic. And yeah, if it was, I gave the movie a star alone just for the chase scene.
And if I'm not mistaken, it's San Francisco,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's where this. Yeah. So I mean, San Francisco, they're kind of known. I mean, they have kind of those up and down roadways. A lot of California does, right? And I love how the camera worked with that, kind of kind of very slopey roads, and you have like the camera. It's very still, as you said, and it goes up, and then you kind of see it come down. It's just it's just a cool little thing. It kind of comes up, flattens at the top, goes down with the car. Certainly puts you in the perspective even, and it's just really good camera work throughout this movie. Even early on in the movie, I found a lot of the cinematography was pretty good. In terms of, I think there was one scene where he's, I think with his wife or girlfriend there in a restaurant, and just kind of the way the focus changes throughout the scene. There's just a lot in there that was kind of clever, added to the movie for sure for me.
I love San Francisco as a city in movies because I lived there for a little bit. It's just a really cool area. There's so much different stuff. Like you have those crazy hills, you have Lombard Street, which is the really famous winding road. But yeah, you have all these crazy roads that are with really big hills. And it's cool when you have all these cars flying off of them and bumping off of the one part that's not going way downhill. But then you also have, obviously you have the Golden Gate Bridge and you have the ocean and stuff like that. There's just so much room to play with here. And also like Peter Yates, the director of this movie, they shot on location for all of this. So he wanted to make this feel really real. And I think there's a few lines I saw from Steve McQueen too, where they were really focused on the realism of this movie and making it not like some thrilling thing, which probably bled more into the cop genre with like Dirty Harry and all of those 70s movies and 80s and go from there. But they were really focused on the procedure of all of this and making it seem reasonable that this would certainly a heightened case, but that people were reacting reasonably in this. And I think for the most part, I think they work really well here.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I definitely understand the hype. This is one of those movies where I feel like I've heard about it for a long time, but really didn't have a whole lot of exposure to it. Because I mean, I feel like Steve McQueen himself isn't as talked about when you're talking about a lot of like classic movie actors, which is kind of odd considering that he was the highest grossing actor for quite a while towards the end of his career. But yeah, it was a good watch. I think this might be the favorite that I've picked for our Babble Club rotation so far.
I'd agree. Yeah, for me, for kind of based off what you've chosen, for sure.
Yeah, I think this movie's neat. I think there's a lot of stuff I really liked in it, especially that realism sense. And they also cast a bunch of real, and there's a lot of those hospital scenes and whatnot, and they cast real doctors and nurses for those scenes, because you'll notice in them that there's not like a lot of theatricality in the way they're talking. They're just a lot about like scalpel, scissors, and they're reading all of the heart measurements and whatnot. It's very, excuse the pun, but it's very clinical. It's very straight to the point. It very much how these people would talk, and I think that's neat. When we see like cop movies like this being made now, you think of these super heavy stylized things with a bunch of twists and turns and things like that, and there's certainly stuff like that in here, right? But I think there's a sense of naturalism to the performances, and also just like the filmmaking itself, where we kind of, like you mentioned, with the cinematography, and there's also a sense of documentary style to it as well, with all those locked off shots and whatnot. So it's really cool. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff in it. Not a movie that I think will stick with me long, because I think it's really about itself. It's not, there's a lot of crazy things you can take from it. And I feel like there's a chance that this movie could even go into a sequel. I wonder if they were talking about that at the time, the way it ends. But I think it's fun. It's a really good, super lean, action thriller noir movie. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, I stand.
Should we next podcast just say we stand or don't stand? And the podcast is 30 seconds long.
That's we'll just do a thumbs up or thumbs down. But yeah, that is Bullitt, and that is this week's episode of the MovieBabble podcast. So we'll be back next week with Mortal Kombat erased from our brains, talking about more movies, talking about more MovieBabble Club. So remember, you can always check us out online at moviebabble.com.